basically we brought together a very good coalition of MEPs, of TDs and of senators. And leading academics as well, of course. The leading academics on this issue. So I'm going to hand you over now to Senator Alice Murray.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the Mayor for Lord Mayor for having us here, and Pana in particular for inviting me, and indeed the People's Movement. And I think we have really interesting discussions ahead of us in the afternoon. The session that I was asked to chair looks at the cost to Ireland of militarisation, particularly the kinds of militarisation we're seeing now under PESCO. And I'm going to hand over to two very able panellists and contributors in a moment. But as Karen did earlier, I'm going to maybe open with one perspective on it, because I know that they're going to speak a lot about the cost in Ireland and to Ireland in terms of Irish priorities. But another aspect of a cost to Ireland that I wanted to touch on, beyond the financial, is in terms of the cost to Ireland's reputation and to its effectiveness in the world. And I just wanted to touch a few things, and I might just add one point before I do. We mentioned neutrality being used in a loose and in a dilute way and being chipped away in terms of its meaning. But one thing that I think is still important is the very fact that even as they make terrible decisions such as PESCO, they're feeling they have to use the word neutrality, and that is because there is a mandate and an understanding of what neutrality is amongst the Irish public, which is huge. And 80% of the Irish public want real neutrality. So I think there is a very wide cohort of people who can be concerned and will be concerned about this. Is this echoing very strangely? Or is it not? Okay. So just three really quick ways that this is going to costing us in Ireland, the new wave of militarisation. In terms of our humanitarian role. And this doesn't begin with PESCO, it begins, we would say with battle groups, but certainly with Operation Sophia. So earlier last year, we saw that Ireland signed up to Operation Sophia. Previously, and this is, I find, to start to figure, we had bilateral work that we did in the Mediterranean. I think the public were so proud of to see our Irish Navy rescuing people and saving lives, and that's something that was great pride in. But Operation Sophia has changed that. And this is a direct quote from the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Not for Foreign Affairs, Minister of State for Defence, Paul Keogh. Transferring to Operation Sophia will result in the redeployment of Irish Naval Service vessels from primarily humanitarian search and rescue operations to primarily security and interception operations. And we have seen the result in that less lives are being saved. So during the period of time when one ship was ever there and changed as the ship was in the Mediterranean previously, Ireland saved 17,500 lives. During a comparable period, the previous Operation Sophia before we joined it, saved 34,000 migrant lives. So, and they had 5 ships. So 5 ships only saved twice as many as one ship. And that is because the priority for these European ships was not humanitarian rescue. And unfortunately, now that we've joined Operation Sophia, we don't have a full year's figures yet, but the early figures we see coming in show that we are saving less lives in the Mediterranean. So on a very real cost, that's a cost of tying ourselves to a flotilla of military operations in Europe rather than contributing also within Europe, but in our unique, particular way, as we had previously been doing around humanitarian rescue. In terms of peacekeeping, that mandate that changed is very important because the mandate has shifted. We heard talk about peacekeeping and peace, but in the PESCO notification document, in the lengthy PESCO notification document, peacekeeping, or even peace building, and I know there's a difference in the two, are not mentioned once. The words do not appear anywhere in the document. They appear all over the speeches from our ministers. They are not in the document even once. The UN gets a single mention at the very beginning, and NATO gets numerous mentions. So we are talking about a new kind of mandated document. And even though there have been failures and disappointments and betrayals in the past, this is a radical new shift, and that's why we specifically need to fight, I believe, PESCO. Ireland has, of course, an incredible reputation in peacekeeping, and part of our reputation in peacekeeping has been because we are respected for working with a different mandate, because we have historically, and this is, I recognise the gentleman from the floor, Doug, it's been chipped away at, but historically, we went on missions in relation to peace, not in relation to interests. And it's that slippage question of do we send soldiers to a front line for interests or solely in the road of peacekeeping? And that's, I think, a key question. The other area where we are really, and this is will be my main focus in campaigning, and I know we'll move over again to the other costs in Ireland, is in terms of disarmament. Because Ireland has an incredible reputation in disarmament, and we heard, I think, very eloquently, people have spoken about the early points of Ireland's establishment and state. But it was, of course, Frank Aiken, who was in fact a Fianna Fáil minister. I try and remind them of that every now and again to hopefully see change their position. Who initiated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I was lucky enough to be one of those there in Croke Park when we negotiated, when Ireland brokered a global ban on cluster munitions. And Ireland again actually won a prize last year for disarmament. So we have this international reputation of pushing the disarmament agenda, and we've won prizes for it, we've records in it, and I'm just quoting because I think it's notable, it's still up on the Department of Foreign Affairs website despite recent decisions, which is, from our early efforts of the United Nations, blah, 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 which is, we recognise the spread of weapons of all kinds fuels conflicts, contributes to human rights abuses and hinders development. That's our policy, in theory. So we have this disarmament record of policy, we have an ability to punch above our weight in making an impact on that. And I'm very worried that we are going to sacrifice that for a very nascent military-industrial complex, which we don't currently have in Ireland. And one of the reasons we were able to broker a ban on cluster munitions is because we weren't tied in the same way as other countries into a military-industrial complex. But we're now seeing companies in Cork, there's groups of companies who are producing armoured surveillance, there's the marine surveillance is a big area, Ireland is trying to get in on the software, and if we don't deal with the area of military research and procurement, we will have what every other country has, which is a set of business interests, which will be stacked up and make it harder and harder for us to maintain neutrality. So that's that question of, I mean, it is literally gunboats are diplomacy. Where does Ireland want to give its focus and give its priority? And that's kind of what we have to lose, maybe just as a sense. And then, I'm going to finish now with this, who benefits? There are companies, military producers, who will benefit. There is also, and it was very true, I think, something that Deputy Ryan said, there are ministers who like to feel they walk into a room with other European ministers and they, are part of a group and a club. And there are people who are looking for senior positions in Ireland. And I think that's something Deputy Kenny mentioned. Ireland is grappling for big contracts and big positions within the European military. We nearly got a very senior role recently in the European military, but I believe it's fortunate we didn't. So there is that question. There are people who are looking to benefit from this. And that's where we have to be extra vigilant and really push and challenge now. And that's why, for me, procurement, and that's why it ties with this section is, we get value for money. Value for money is getting floated all the time. And that's what we're getting told. Value for money, it's irresponsible of us to spend the public money when we could get a better deal if we went in and bought stuff together with 3 or 4 other countries. But that deep moral culpability, which is, if we develop military equipment with other countries who have very different histories, many colonial histories, who have very different mandates, who are absolutely empowered to implement, in the case of Germany, they are in Afghanistan. In the case of Austria, they have, a new teetering on fascist government that's come to place. And in the case we've seen horrific situations in terms of some of the things that have happened on borders with military equipment from Europe. So we have a real moral question on the equipment and the money. And the reason I'm focusing on that is because we need to follow the money if we're going to challenge this, and we need to tackle it at that point. As well as winning the battle on principles, we also need to make every single penny that is spent a difficult, arduous, politically challenged penny that is spent in terms of military weaponry. And again, the last point I would say, of course, the personnel on the ground should be getting better wages and better conditions. And I would question if they have in fact let those conditions run down as part of a justification for bringing in this, because there is nothing to stop in last year's budget or the budget before them increasing the wages and giving decent pay and basic conditions to people who are, in many cases, joining our armed services because they're different. It's a different feeling to enter the army and as an Irish member of an Irish army than it is to enter as a part of. They are not mercenaries, they're people who make a decision to enter a particular form, and I think it's also a question of should they be asked to take up different mandates. I think it's no coincidence we see huge numbers of people leaving the army at the moment. Anyway, those are some of the issues on the international side, but there's going to be very deep discussion on the ground. We're very lucky in the panellists that we have. I know that Thomas Pringle is going to speak. I think Seamus, are you speaking first? Is that right, or is it? Whichever way we went with. So Seamus is an independent politician from Tipperary. He has a great background in Clonmel with the Workers and Unemployed Action Unit. He's worked previously with the League for a Workers' Republic, and he's worked on Clonmel Borough Council and South Tipperary County Council. And he came through the hospital administration area as well originally, so he's kind of had all of the history of working with, I'm reading through the CV because there's lots of interesting things in it, but it is around somebody who has worked through workers' rights, through union rights, through that area, and championed up, and has now come on to the national stage and is championing issues of justice and issues for equality in that space. So that's Seamus Healy, and then Thomas Pringle, who I also have to personally thank, because anytime we can't put in PQs as a senator, so I constantly hound Thomas's office. He puts in every question that any of us want to ask. He asks all the difficult questions, I think, and I'm sure on many of your behalfs as well. And Thomas is a TD, an independent TD from Donegal. He's been, I think, a very vocal champion on issues of equality justice, and he's also, I think, given an example of how Ireland can play a different leading role within Europe, because the work he's done around fossil fuel divestment has been something that's been a marker of how Ireland can actually forge better policies and new policies, and that we don't have to be followers, but that we can be leaders in a different perspective. And I think that's something that Thomas should be very proud of. So I'm going to hand over to our panellists, and then I look forward to your input later on.
Thanks, Mary Alice. First of all, just to thank the Mayor, Micheál, for affording us the opportunity to be here in Mansion House today, and to thank Pana and the People's Movement for allowing me to speak. So I'm going to start with a quotation that says, "Integration into permanent European structured military cooperation, or PESCO, involves a binding commitment to increased military spending." And that statement was made by a pro-European militarisation advocate and opponent of Irish unity, of Irish neutrality rather, Ben Tonra, Professor of International Relations at UCD, and he said that on RTE some time ago. He's also the project leader of the Irish Institute for International and European Affairs Policy Group on European Security and Defence. And this body has recently advocated ending neutrality in an opinion piece by its then President Brendan Halligan in the Irish Times. And he said the following, he said, "Post-Brexit support from Berlin and Paris will come at a cost. As the Franco-German axis reasserts itself, Irish neutrality and corporation tax policies will have to be revisited." So that sets the scene for where the PESCO is going to. So current military spending in Ireland is just shy of the 1 billion mark. But PESCO involves alignment with NATO, and there is a number of countries who participate in PESCO who are also members of NATO. and the NATO requirement for military spending in member states is 2% of gross domestic product. In Ireland, and I know someone has raised a query earlier this morning as to what is gross domestic product in Ireland. It's been confused in that, but if we take the official situation at the moment, which is something in the region of 400 billion euros. Now 2% of that is 8 billion euros. So the objective is to increase military spending to something in the region of 8 billion euros per year. But even if the cost of PESCO involvement doesn't ultimately reach that figure, it is absolutely clear from all the correspondence, all the data that's available, it's absolutely clear that there will be a significant and substantial increase in military expenditure over the next number of years. And that leads to the fiscal treaty. And under that treaty, there are severe restrictions on borrowing and on the size and the nature of budget deficits which any country can run. So this means that substantial increases in public spending must come from existing taxation, from increasing existing taxation, or indeed new taxation. And of course we can be absolutely certain that any new taxation or any increased taxation isn't going to come from the super rich. They have had a holiday for forever almost in this country, so we can be sure that ordinary working people and their families will bear the brunt of any new or increased taxation. And it means, of course, that military spending then will be done also at the expense of the provision of housing and health and education and welfare. And I think Thomas Pringle is going to deal with that in more detail, I think. So I leave that in. But the facts are simple, that military spending, increased military spending, will be at the expense of housing and health, education and general public services. And Dr. Mary C. Murphy of the Department of Politics and Governance at UCD, she said as much recently, and if you remember the Killarney Economic Conference where she spoke, and she said there may be an element of payback for Ireland in return for the support the state has received from other members of the EU 27. She was speaking, as I said, at the Killarney Economic Conference, which was chaired by Mark Hennessy of the Irish Times, and you remember as well that that conference was addressed by Arlene Foster of the DUP. So Dr. Murphy set out possible scenarios in which Ireland might be required to be giving in terms of neutrality or taxation in a debate on the future of Europe. And she said it may open up a lot of difficulties for Irish voters. So basically what she's saying is there may well be a play-off neutrality as against taxation and support from the other EU 27. And we can also be certain, as I said earlier, we can be certain that it will be at the expense of public service, but we can also be sure that any spending like that will come ahead of the restoration of cuts in allowances or indeed decent wages and conditions for Defence Forces personnel. And we've all seen recently where wives and partners of Defence Forces have been seeking such restoration, such decent pay. Very many of the Defence Forces, the soldiers at the moment, would be in receipt, for instance, of family income supplement. Someone raised earlier as well, what will be the direct effect of PESCO on workers and working class. And obviously soldiers are workers, and there's a direct effect there. And of course there's also the direct effect if spending is diverted from housing, as it will be, health and other services. that's again a direct effect. And of course, there's the ultimate effect, and we've seen in 2 world wars where effectively working class people were used and slaughtered almost at will, and that's something that can't be ruled out in the future either. So the other thing that is happening currently is that additional military spending is already in the pipeline, is already happening. And you may have seen an article in the Irish Examiner in recent times where it said the government has purchased a huge ship from which helicopters can be launched, and the Navy considers buying a 200 million multi-role ship. So in the recent past, in line with this increased spending, the government has already spent about 250 million euros buying new replacements for existing Coast Guard vessels rather than refurbishing them. These vessels could have been refurbished at a fraction of the cost, but they've expended monies on replacing these ships. Again, as I said, in advance, obviously, of even making decent wages and conditions available to serving personnel. So there's a fourth ship for the fleet, and that is currently being built. It's the L.E. George Bernard Shaw, costing 67 million euros. It's currently being constructed in Devon and to be delivered this summer. So I raised a question with the Taoiseach and the Minister of Defence in relation to what is called a multi-role vessel, and this is in addition to the ones I've already mentioned. And I asked him what is the estimated additional cost if a decision had been made to put the provision of this vessel out to tender, and what the position was in relation to it. And I think it might be important just to give some of his reply. And he said, the white paper provides for the replacement of the current Navy service flagship L.E. Etna with a multi-role vessel, which will be enabled for helicopter operations and will also have a freight carrying capacity. It is the government's intent that this new vessel will provide a flexible and adaptive capability for a wide range of maritime tasks, both at home and overseas. He said planning has commenced on this project and is intended to hold a public tender competition in due course to cover the supply of the vessel. This, of course, is subject to the availability of funding within the overall defence capital funding envelope. The cost of this vessel will only be known after the tender competition has been completed. So the acquisition of the vessel will, and he says the acquisition of this vessel will ensure that the operational capabilities of the Naval Service as a state's principal seagoing agency are maintained to the greatest extent, and taking account of the overall policy approach in the white paper on defence. So I suppose we should note in that reply the word overseas. And he says, again, it's the government's intent that this new vessel will provide a flexible and adaptive capability for a wide range of maritime tasks, both at home and overseas. He didn't answer the question in relation to the estimated cost, but he certainly didn't contradict the examiner's reference to 200 million euros. So this vessel, as I said, which will replace the L.E. Etna, the Etna has a length of about 80 metres. The new ship being purchased has almost double that length. It's 150 metres. It will be capable, he says, of carrying a battalion of soldiers and will carry landing craft to put them ashore from sea. And according again to the teacher, it will have a freight carrying capacity. This could include, obviously, military vehicles. So it's very clear that this ship is something different than the kind of ships that have been available in the past. It's not obviously simply for protection of our coastline or for fishing or for drug apprehension. This is obviously a ship which is going to be used overseas. So it's clear that the ship will be suitable to participate in naval expeditions with the navies of other European countries. And of course we're already participating in Operation Sophia in the Mediterranean, and this expedition is assisting currently. This expedition is assisting the return of refugees to detention camps in Libya. As merely referred to the fact that the number of refugees being rescued was declining. And of course, part of the reason for that, if not the full reason for that, is that the European ships are now effectively corralling refugees around the Libyan coast to be picked up by the Libyan Coast Guard, one of 3 different governments which are currently operating in Libya. And what is happening then is that these refugees are being returned effectively to detention camps in Libya. So people like Médecins Sans Frontières and the UN Commission on Human Rights and indeed even the Luxembourg Foreign Minister have already described those camps as detention centres. They say horrendous centres of violation of human rights outside the rule of law. So we're already in a situation, we're already in this situation, and this vessel that is now being purchased is obviously a vessel which will be used in that type of operation. And of course, we have to remember as well that very recently the new French President Macron said that a new military invasion of Libya should be considered. Now, will Irish troops be put ashore in Libya to die effectively for French interests? It's also well to remember that the recent atrocity, for instance, in Manchester, was carried out by Libyans reacting to the whole situation, there. So, I suppose there is, and I'll finish very shortly now. There's a wider context as well, I suppose, to these issues, and Dr. Murphy, who's concerned about the further dilution of Irish unity, rightly so, and Brendan Flanagan, who wants to end Irish neutrality, they have a common underlying assumption, really, and that assumption is that this 26 county government is weak, it's vulnerable to pressure from other foreign powers, and on fundamental issues, the 26 county state has very restricted, if any, political and economic sovereignty. And that's the assumption I believe is behind both of those contributions. In fact, I suppose, as we're here in the Mansion House, I suppose the last Irish Parliament which had any strong sovereignty, didn't meet around the corner in Leinster House, but met just around the corner here in the next room to us, almost 100 years ago. It'll be 100 years in January of next year, 1st of 1919. So I think due to the lack of sovereignty, I think we have to ask ourselves the question is, could we end up in one set of conflicts due to the use of Shannon by military forces, US military forces, or in a different set of conflicts due to our participation in PESCO? Could our soldiers die in wars between big powers or wars of conquest by big powers? That may seem remote, but when you look at the situation right throughout the Middle East, and particularly in places like Yemen, it may not be too remote at all. and it's something that we should certainly consider. James Connolly, I think, he was right in my view when he said an all-Ireland republic with full economic and political sovereignty is necessary to ensure that the interests of Irish people are put first by an Irish government. I believe PESCO is a game changer because it involves the direct involvement of the Irish state and its armed forces in foreign wars. That is what effectively we're signing up for. Direct involvement by the Irish state and by Irish armed forces in foreign wars. And I believe that we have to reverse that decision, and hopefully this conference is the start of a campaign to reverse that decision. And it would as well, in my view, be the first step towards restoring all Ireland sovereignty. So look, that's great to say. I'll take questions and try to answer them if you have any. Thank you.
In terms of funding, I suppose, yeah, the competition is the key to it, but the link is actually, I think, is a good way of visualising it for people as well. That they're spending this on the hospital, is going to spend this on militarisation as well, and it's a way of making people actually see what to do. And really what Karen said is very interesting around the European rights. Now, I didn't think that they would be that sophisticated about it. I thought they just were going to crack out and do it anyway. So actually, probably it's interesting that the EU is actually paying for it, but I don't think they would have to, because I think the media would go along with it anyway.
Now, we have to finish up because I think the next panel is, but I'm just going to take literally one sentence comments. I see 3 hands across the room there, beginning with yourself, and then we'll have a 1 sentence of response from the panel.
Okay, John Lannan, Shannon Watch, but I also work at the University of Limerick. And I just want to mention something called Horizon 2020 that some of you may or may not know about. It's the European Commission's Research and Innovation Fund. If you Google Horizon 2020 militarisation, you probably won't find anything. But if you Google Horizon 2020 and security and national freedom and freedoms and things like this, you will find quite a lot. And quite a lot of our institutions in Ireland, our universities, Science Foundation Ireland, Enterprise Ireland, all of these bodies are directly embedded in Horizon 2020.
I think that's a really useful point.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a very brief point. I was aware of the Jean Monnet stuff broadly, but the first reference I saw in an Irish newspaper to the fact that journalists are a little bit compromised was about, I think it was shortly after the Brexit referendum in Britain, when some brave journalist gingerly put his head above the parapet and talked about the coverage of the Brexit campaign here, and referred to the fact that some journalists, although we can use that language, were compromised. So I've only seen it once, and the first time, and I just thought that was significant. It needs more to.
Exactly, and actually their coverage of trade is very interesting too when you look at CETA and things like that in that perspective. Last point here.
Just briefly, Paddy Healy, I represent WOEG on the executive, and as there's people here, and I know Roger and Frank will be proposing, a way forward later on. But one thing I think we should all be aware of is the budget, next budget, and we must keep a very, very close eye on what's happening to defence spending within that budget. But not only that, let us be prepared, because it is very, very possible that they will hide increases in defence expenditure, particularly in the procurement area, within some kind of an EU vote, a minister for European Union, or this kind of thing. We must be absolutely prepared for, hidden increases in defence spending within the next budget. And I think, if we have that in advance, or as far in advance as we can, perhaps it could be a focal point, for doing something for, a bigger than Leinster House or something like that, and
great. I think that's very useful, and also in terms of our military aid, we have to be very careful. There's a huge issue there, and that's another area that can be hidden. So those are all, I think there's so many solid and concrete useful points. I hate to have to end, but we do have to end the panel, because as I understand it, the next panellists have arrived and are ready to. So just to thank again the contributors and all of the audience.